Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of the MSX Insiders podcast. I'm here with my co-host, Jatine, as usual. And today, we're super excited to chat with one of our classmates, Jed Simons. But before we get into that, Jatine, we've got 2 weeks left before graduation. And I know you and I are both kind of heads down in the job hunting process. How are you feeling?
Don't depress us here, Sasha.
Jed's already adding his musical spice to our podcast. Yeah, I think it's a very unsettling time in terms of not knowing what we're going to be doing, but equally exciting because we have a blank canvas, and many of us have come from really experienced roles where we had a great degree of influence, and I think we're trying to do something different. So it takes a bit of time. But I think it's also about, being persistent and, if you chat to the MSX class in a year's time, it'll all work out. So it takes a lot of time. I think that's the key thing. I
feel like I'm kind of now hitting my stride in this job hunting process. So I'm feeling in good spirits today, but every day kind of fluctuates.
Yeah. You do some cold outreach and then no one responds and then somebody responds and it makes your day.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a big roller coaster, right?
It absolutely is.
And some weeks are better than others, but I think if you look at the trajectory, right, you can see you've gone from very few opportunities to more opportunities. So I don't think you can get too fussed on the day by day process, because every time somebody's asking you, wow, what are you doing next year? Like, I don't know. But if you look, what did you think you were doing at the start of the quarter? What do you think you're doing now? There's a massive amount of progress, right? So I think that's the key thing, just looking at the big picture and being optimistic about the progress.
Yeah, I do think that the hardest thing is getting to this point of clarity about what it is that you want to do. Now it feels a lot more like execution, to your point, the cold outreach emails or informational interviews or actual interviews. That all comes down to kind of just the execution, but getting to this point took a year. It's the whole year-long journey that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I think I was speaking to one of the admits a couple of weeks ago, and I was saying, it's really difficult. A year is a long time, but it's a really short time to figure out a massive career shift.
Yeah.
Right? The MBAs have 2 years. We come in here for 4 quarters, and we work really hard to figure out where we're going. And it's okay to take some time. I think we mentioned it last week. Most people take a couple months to settle and figure things out. And I think a lot of us are going through that process right now, which is okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and somebody who's done this a couple of times before in their career is our guest, Jed. So, I was, doing some research, and as I do, and I looked and I was like, wow, Jed has a storied career, right? He started out, he was at Brown. I think, in one of the lectures they said, who's played college sports? And Jed was like, I played water polo. I was like, I didn't know that. I played first team water polo for Brown, I think. And then he was an investment banker for a couple of years. He made a shift to media in the form of DreamWorks and had a nearly decade career of DreamWorks, taking a bunch of roles there, which we'll hopefully talk about today. And then he made the last kind of shift in his career, and he founded a couple of startups, exited a few of them to some major NASDAQ-listed companies. And in that time, he's provided a lot of his mentorship and insights about life into the community. He was his BBL, which is the where we share stories in the MSX, was about how he was a mentor to somebody who was in his community, and he maintains that relationship today. And I think Jed does a lot of mentorship and guidance for our class, and keeping us honest and providing us some good fashion sense, some music, and some good times as well. So it's a great pleasure to have Jed on the podcast. Welcome, Jed.
Well, that's very kind of you, Jatine, and coming from you, that's quite a compliment because you are the fashion icon of our cohort, without question.
No one's described me as a fashion icon before, but I'll take it.
You really are. You and James are kind of neck and neck.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you end up in this media? I know you've been in LA, you've been in New York, you've been in London.
Yeah.
How did you end up in this media space?
When you guys were talking about my career and all this stuff, I mean, my interpretation is God, I'm old.
Young at heart, that's what's important.
A lot of elapsed time, yeah, for sure. Well, taking it back, I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, right next to UCLA, and as a kid, I discovered water polo, which is kind of a California sport, and I loved playing, and I really wanted to play in college. That was number one. Number two, my other objective was I wanted to get as far away from home as possible. So through some sort of, fortuitous circumstances, I ended up getting recruited by some of the Northeast schools, and I ended up at Brown, which was really a perfect fit for me. It was the only college I applied to, and luckily I got in. And I had a great experience there. I majored in philosophy, as you may have mentioned. So that was fantastic. So that was sort of the early times. You want me to talk about kind of career stuff?
Yeah.
So when I ran into it, I actually was thinking about going to law school, and I applied to some law schools. And but the other track was thinking, well, I really want to do investment banking because it seemed like you could just get a lot of experience very quickly. And sort of being a philosophy major, I always wanted to go into business, and but I didn't know anything. Like I literally did not know what a balance sheet was. And so I applied to some law schools, but I also applied to some investment banking roles. I ended up getting, into Stanford Law School, but I also got a job offer at Morgan Stanley, which was where I wanted to work. And I kind of went back and forth, and I ended up doing the Morgan Stanley thing. So I went back there, and they started training us sort of, and it was interesting because most of the other kids were sort of finance majors from different schools,
Right.
and I knew nothing. So they had this kind of crash course where everyone was really bored, but I was like, oh my God, a balance sheet. Now I know why it's called a balance sheet. There's two sides and they balance. It's like amazing. I think a couple people said that in accounting when we took it. They're like, no way. That's why they call it a balance sheet. So I did that, but my objective was really, I was in the media group, which is the group I wanted to be in. So there's some consistency to the story. But my objective was to get a job in music, notably, first and foremost, but more broadly in media. So so DreamWorks was kind of the hot new entertainment startup at the time, and I really kind of wanted to work for David Geffen, who's one of the founders, who was kind of my North Star. So through a sort of an act of persistence, I was able to get an interview there and end up getting a role. And that sort of started my career at that organization. And my first job was, we had all this capital committed, like a couple $2 billion, but we drew it down each quarter. So my job was consolidating all of the projections and kind of making sense of them, and then sending the notices out to the investors and following up with them and talking to them and meeting with them, which was really interesting. Then ultimately, I ended up at the record company, which was where I wanted to be. And I worked sort of distantly under David Geffen, but directly for Mo Austin, who's a really famous kind of storied music executive from Warner Brothers Records. And I worked with him. He actually sadly passed away last year in his mid-90s. So I did that, and then the record business kind of went through a cycle, the whole broader industry. We ended up selling that business to Universal, and Interscope was the imprint they put us under. But then they shipped me off to London at DreamWorks. So I didn't go to Universal. I stayed with DreamWorks, and I moved to London, where I was given a role in international marketing and distribution, which was really a lot of fun and a great learning experience. So that took me to London, and I was there for a bit, and that's when I sort of made the decision I wanted to do something a little different and get into the startup world.
Wow. And then after that, you built a FinTech company. So tell us a little bit, because music and FinTech to me feel like, very far away on the spectrum.
Sure. I mean, so I'd always wanted to start my own company. My grandfather was an entrepreneur. My dad was as well. And I didn't have kind of I could have used like Scott Brady or Jim Ellis or Dave Dotson or Irv Grossbeck and all these kind of storied professors here. I could have used their guidance, but I created my own kind of framework, which was, I thought, like, what are the mega trends that we're going to kind of persist for the next 25 years? And I came up with a short list, like renewable energy, urbanization, expanding healthcare to seniors. But one of the sort of frameworks was, analog to digital, which ultimately was the basis for what I ended up doing. But sort of each of those, I created kind of like a concept around each of those. So one of them was, urbanization, people moving to cities. And I thought, well, how do you alleviate traffic? And I came up with this concept of kind of creating a carpool app. And that brought me to the founders of Lyft kind of years before, these two guys up here. And that was my first time in Palo Alto, visiting them. But I settled on solving kind of a financial workflow and liquidity problem, which arose sort of in the transition of media and advertising from analog to digital, which is kind of one of the themes. And I think I sort of found myself, I think I got lucky in the sense that I sort of stumbled upon kind of what became the FinTech kind of wave.
Revolution, yeah.
Yeah, sort of early on that. And Sasha, you were sort of a part of that as well. Payments and Bank of America. But in any event, that's what I did. And I'd say luckily, given kind of like the tailwinds we had as the FinTech thing started to build up, fortunately I was able to make a ton of mistakes and still kind of keep going. So I think I got very lucky in that regard.
I really love that you say that because I don't think we talk enough about luck here at Stanford. It's all about these frameworks or, this was a relationship that I leveraged or I just had this like brilliant idea. And I think that a lot of these successful businesses do have this aspect of luck, like the right time, the right people being in the right place, like having those right relationships. So I really appreciate that you kind of recognize that as part of your journey.
I mean, look, luck's an important thing.
Yeah.
And I think we're all very lucky,
Absolutely.
in so many different ways. I mean, we're so lucky to be here and have the opportunity to be here where so many haven't, which is great. But it's interesting, like in formation of new ventures the other day, they talked about how if you're way too early, you need to have enough capital to kind of persist.
Right.
But if you're kind of late to a market, then you really have to have amazing execution. And so there's that counterbalance of sort of early versus late and timing. And there's so many examples of businesses that were sort of a little bit ahead of their time, maybe ahead of a forthcoming technical revolution or just market development or trends and whatnot. So luck's important. I mean, you can't discount it.
We had that case about the guy who built Fango.
Oh, yeah.
And, how he also potentially could have had the idea of Uber and chose not to pursue it at that time. And then, look what Uber became. And, I would just say, Uber people got lucky.
You have to buy the tickets, right? You're not going to win the lottery if you don't buy the tickets. So
100%.
Buy a few of them.
You got to be in the game.
Yes,
that's true.
Well, you've mentioned some of our very, prominent professors and lecturers here at Stanford that teach a number of different courses. I was curious.
And some prominent classmates like you too.
Oh. But I was just curious, from what you've learned here at Stanford, what are some of the things, maybe 2 or 3 big things or themes that if you could redo starting your business that you would incorporate into that?
So let's start with this, which is I did a lot of things wrong and I made a lot of mistakes. And I think you'd need a full podcast series to sort of get into all those things. I'd say one mistake we made was kind of, and I see this a lot in formation new ventures, and I just laugh when I hear it because I'm thinking I made that mistake too, which is you can always you can convince yourself of anything. And I find when I talk to different founders now, I hear them sort of convincing themselves, and they're not, sometimes you have some challenging thoughts and they sort of don't want to hear it. And I'd say we made the classic top-down analysis, which I think overstated our TAM. I think instinctively I thought the TAM for one of our products was smaller. But you can convince yourself it's billions, but that isn't necessarily the addressable market.
Yeah.
We had defensibility issues. I recognize that in one of our classes they talked about how customers really pay for convenience, and our product was not easy to use. We made a strategic partnership, which in some sense kind of sealed our fate in terms of our ability to expand into other markets. We made a lot of mistakes, but we did a few things right, and I'm really I recognize that, which is number one, we had an amazing team at my company, product, engineering, go-to-market, and the administration. We had great recruiting, great retention. We had a fantastic work culture, and we did a great acquisition that kind of just, I think we stuck the landing and it all worked out really well. So I would say in terms of lessons learned, there's so many, but I think I probably would have challenged some of our initial sort of maybe hypotheses or found ways in product market fit when Andy Ratcliffe came in for that session. You really have to talk to a lot of users, a lot of customers, and just make sure that your product is really exactly on the right course before you try to scale it, and has to have all those signals. So I'd say that's one thing which I probably would really sort of focus much more just on the product and less on the business. To any event,
Makes sense.
I mean, Jed, I think you've taken so much of a depth out of the classes, right? And I remember having a conversation with you a few weeks ago where you were you really get anxious about doing podcasts and public speaking engagements. And
Oh my God.
this week we saw you kind of presenting at the MSX Teacher Awards with Emerson Kluger, and I was like, wow, this is like really how Stanford can take somebody and transform them. Not that you were a bad public speaker, but your confidence has kind of changed gears completely, right? And I think a big part of like Stanford and the experience is working on these business skills, as well as things that you deliberately want to improve, like communication and presenting. And Jed, you're one of the kind of standout people that I think has really embraced that. So I mean, tell us about your experience and a little bit of that anxiety, where it comes from, and where you find yourself now, and the courses that
this is a different kind of conversation. Well, it's just no one's going to hear this, right? Look. One of the things I think it's helpful to be somewhat deliberate when you come here. I mean, the thing about Stanford and the GSB is it is an unbelievable place. I mean, it is overwhelming how much is going on here. There's so many, in terms of the academic side, there's a zillion classes that are all interesting. You have world-class professors, but then on top of that, you've got amazing classmates who know so much between the MSX and MBAs, and then you go across the street to other schools. I'm friends with some Aero Astro students and CS and Econ and all these other people. It's incredible. But then you've got all kinds of clubs here. You have events, BBLs, which are brown bag lunches, where you'll have CEOs of companies come in, and there's 3 or 4 of them a day, and they're all interesting. And then, in the evenings, there's 4 or 5 things. I mean, there's a lot to do. So you have to be very deliberate in terms of what you want to focus on. Otherwise, I think you can get kind of really overwhelmed pretty quickly. So for me, I came in with a few objectives, but I'd say one of them was really, I wanted to improve my public speaking comfort level. And I think in some so I designed, our first sort of fall elective. I took StratComm with Alison Kluger and Bert Alper right away. I ranked it, and I just made the decision I was going to do it and throw myself in, so I could kind of develop some skills and then hopefully kind of practice them throughout the other sort of my tenure here. I'd say this, I think I improved in some regard. I mean, you have these incredible sort of learning experiences in the classroom, but I'd say this, it does take its toll. In other words, the Alison Kluger thing went really well the other day, and I'm grateful for that, but it did create a lot of anxiety beforehand. Caused a lot of, I was really tired afterwards for a couple of days. I mean, it does take its toll, and that's the part you don't see. And I think there's a lesson there that's maybe a little broader, which is, I think it's helpful, and you learn, that's where you kind of take some lessons from Managing Growing Enterprises, MGE, which we took with Dave Dotson, which was a great class, but you also can apply some lessons from Touchy-Feely about listening skills and communication, and maybe not making assumptions. They use the term here, crossing the net. I shouldn't cross the net and tell you what you do or make assumptions about what your intentions are. It's helpful to ask, because I think some people have said, God, you make it's so easy for you to do that. And I'm thinking, it actually isn't. It's a lot of work. Just to give you an example, the day before I went to the room, I did what Allison always said to do. I went to the room, I practiced in the room, I scoped it out. I checked out kind of where I'd be standing. I figured out where I was going to sit. I went through it a few times trying to envision how it was going to work. And so it's a lot of work, right? So it takes a lot of work to make it look easy.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I took that class last quarter, and it was by far one of my most stressful classes, because I dislike public speaking, despite what people think about me.
I'm going to cross the net and just say, Sasha, sorry, I'm going to cut you off, but I'm the guest. I can cut off a little bit. Sasha, I sit behind you. Well, first of all, we were sat together in accounting, which was so much fun.
Yes.
We had so much fun with Professor No, one of our favorites.
Yeah.
But then I sit behind you in Formation of Ventures, and I love it when Sasha, especially early on in the class, when it's kind of everyone's a little anxious, it's a pretty big class, she kind of puts her hand straight up, and I'm thinking, all right, we got to hear Sasha talk. And when you talk, you speak so clearly, and you kind of use your hands, and it's like your thoughts are so succinct.
Thank
So I think you're a
you.
great public speaker.
Oh, thank you. But
and
it
very
does
good
take
in
practice.
Yeah.
To your point, like I remember when we got to the fall quarter, and it was like the first time all the MBA students were back, and I was sitting in Angel and VC investing class, which has like 70 people in it. It's massive.
Yeah.
And I didn't know most of the people. Like I was really nervous to raise my hand, and I can't really count asking a question in that class as public speaking, but that anxiety, like I totally understand, where you're coming from with that. And I do think that Stanford does a fantastic job about putting together these curriculums and these classes that teach us as leaders all of these like soft skills.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it's strategic communications, negotiations class, or winning writing. You mentioned, touchy-feely and MGE. Like all of these are kind of soft skill classes that give us tools, frameworks, and the ability to practice.
Yeah. Pass to power. Yeah, and look, I'll challenge one thing you just said, which is I actually do think raising your hand in class is public speaking. I think talking in a boardroom is public speaking. I think trying to convince your classmates to join a band, like it's all, these skills are sort of pervasive, and
right.
they're critical to sort of get. It's great to have the right answer, and it's great to kind of have clear thoughts and viewpoints, but you need to be able to communicate them, and you need to be able to sell them, and I think that's public speaking. So it's about kind of taking it and landing these with other people and adapting your style in a way that will resonate with your audience. That's kind of rule number one in strategic communications is aim. You basically got to know your audience, and you start with that, like who are you speaking to, and you have to keep that in mind the whole time.
Yeah.
I mean, Jed, I really like how you were super focused about taking a skill and mastering it, right? And I don't think a lot of people see the hard work that goes into the result, right? So I think the nice thing I take away from this is that while we see these little snippets of excellence, there's so much that you can do at Stanford to kind of build that up to that point, right? And there's such a vast toolkit, as Sasha said, in terms of courses, etc. I mean, if you look back at the courses that kind of shaped you outside of the strategic communications course, what has really, made this communication journey and this development journey of the soft skills well-rounded and complete?
You mean in terms of the other courses I've selected? Is that the question?
Yeah.
Well, let's start off by saying I've loved like so many of the classes here. I mean, and we've taken quite a few at this point. I haven't counted. It's got to be around 20 some odd, right? Ish.
Electives? Yeah, probably.
Well, just in terms of including the core too. If you take, probably more than that actually.
That.
Yeah, maybe closer to 30,
Yeah.
20, 25 or 30. So, let's just talk. Well, maybe I'll just talk through some of the classes that have sort of resonated. Which is, I loved negotiations. That was a super fun class. It was early on. The early classes where we didn't really know each other. So I don't know if your audience understands. MSX starts in the summer when we're basically the only folks on campus. So we dominate the campus, and we don't know each other that well yet. There's 2 sections. So you're sort of learning as you go, but we're all in classes together. So part of the fun is you're in a negotiations class. You're negotiating against people you don't know that well. You feel like Jorge just dominating, taking everybody's money.
Their lunch money.
Taking their lunch money, exactly. And as I mentioned before, I loved accounting, which you wouldn't think, but like it was just so much fun. And Susie was fantastic. And I sat next to Sasha, which was super fun. Like touchy-feely was an interesting one. I think that's a must-do. They say in touchy-feely you should take like a 15% risk. That's kind of what they use as a framework to kind of push out of your comfort zone. I went for it. I went for like 50% risk.
Whoa.
I think I paid the price.
Bold.
I paid the price, and I was in the hot seat more than less.
Yeah.
But God, I mean, there are so many classes. The AI class I'm taking now is fantastic with so many incredible guests with Eric Schmidt and Reid Hoffman, and so many. Like there's classes that were like systems leadership where you have the CEO. I think 3 classes in a row. We had the CEO of Wells Fargo, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, and CEO of Nike. Like boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Which was really exciting. I don't know, man. It's gonna take a while to kind of take a step back and reflect. Because there's just so many amazing experiences here. I mean, winning writing was super cool.
I'm in it now, and it's fun. Yeah, it's super interesting, and I think some of the things that I've learned are like a little counterintuitive to what I had always thought my entire life.
Oh, for sure. I changed the way I changes the way I write my emails for sure. Mm-hmm. And then data and decisions. It's interesting to be in classes like, especially in the core. So you got Jatine here, who you could have taught that class. Like this guy is unbelievable. 100%. Oh my God. He could, with ARP, his programming skills and his understanding of kind of statistics and all that stuff. And you have other people that are sort of new to it. So you kind of learn from each other and you get to see sort of what their different skills are. So there's learning. There's so much learning outside the classroom here as well, in terms of leadership lessons. I mean, I'm telling you, I learned more sort of putting a band together for Band Foam. Just kind of trying to recruit people. Everyone had their own kind of objectives, trying to negotiate schedules because people are so busy trying to get 5 people in a room together. I mean, literally. And you got Nico DeLuna, who's an MBA 1, he schedules everything, including sleep. So his schedule is 24 hours. It's insane. Any event, yeah.
I mean, Jed, I think I love the way, if I go back to the DreamWorks story, of like trying to hustle and find this job and work under someone, and then coming to Stanford and saying tackle communications up front. I think it's so cool to see how you can plant the seeds of being deliberate and then seeing what the fruits of that seed will be. And for Jed, it's clear, right? Like a storied career. Going after music.
I'm just getting started.
Yeah.
I'm already excited.
But I mean, there's not many people that can go into investment banking and say they want to go into music and then have a go at that. And then tackle your kind of thing that you think is your biggest development area of communications and be upfront and tackle it upfront and have a go at it. So I think I take away a big lesson of, being focused and being relentless about that focus, right?
Yeah. You have to
like
be
that.
willing. It's funny.
Yeah.
It's really interesting to be in MSX where you had some experience. And I think that's kind of the reason why this program exists. And it started off as a Sloan Fellow program. And this is sort of an evolution of that, which is when you have some experience and you bring that into the classroom and it creates kind of a different sort of learning experience. And
100%.
For me, so much of what I learned resonated, and some stuff is sort of counterintuitive. And for example, like Paths to Power, they talk about breaking the rules. I've been breaking the rules my whole life. At Morgan Stanley, I worked on a deal, and it was for Grupo Televisa, and they gave us all watches at the end, and these were Cartier watches, nice things. And I was a young guy. I was like, I'll take it, but we weren't allowed to accept gifts over $50. But my thought was I'm leaving here in a month. What am I gonna how are you gonna bribe me? So my boss is like, no, we're giving them back. So I was like, well, what if I can get the CEO of Morgan Stanley to agree? He's like, hey, if you can, sure. So I wrote a little letter and sent it up there. It was it wasn't an email, it was like a memo. He signed it saying no. He said okay, whatever, with the signature, sent it back, and I still have the watch.
Wow.
I can give you tons of stories like that, right? And breaking the rules, it's important here and there.
Yeah.
Even at Stanford, they teach you that. Yeah.
So, what plans after we graduate? What are you planning to do for the summer? What are you thinking about doing next? Starting your own business? Going back to media?
It's really interesting. The one thing I can tell you is I am definitely getting sad. And I would say sad combined. There's a term I learned in Brazil years ago called saudade, and I'm sure I'm butchering it. We can ask one of our 10 Brazilian classmates. It's like a bittersweet is probably the way to say it. On the one hand, I'm super grateful for this experience. It's been so much more than I expected. I had pretty high expectations coming in. It's 100x that. It's indescribable.
Yeah.
I'd say probably the most pleasant surprise has been just how much I love all my classmates, all of you guys. That's been really a pleasant surprise, because I figured, you just don't know, because that's a real unknown element, which is
absolutely,
you're going to meet classmates, but you don't know who they are, what they're going to be like. It's a leap of faith to think that you'll get along with them, or you'll like them, or they'll like you, and it's interesting in that. And I'll answer your question about what's next, but I'll get there in a minute. My senior year at college, I loved it. I mean, the beginning I got off to a rough start. It was tough, kind of playing on a varsity sport where I was gone every weekend, and I felt like I was outside the rhythm of being a normal freshman. But my senior year, I kind of had figured the place out, and I loved it. And I kept thinking, I kept track. Like I had like a countdown in my little notebook, and I tried to savor every day because I just thought, like, I know this is special, and I'm certain I won't have this kind of experience the rest of my life. It's just impossible. And I kind of assumed, obviously, life has all kinds of amazing, elevated, rich experiences, but that particular type of one, I didn't think I would have that again.
Yeah.
And what's crazy is I'm feeling the same way here.
Yeah.
I did the same thing, actually. I wrote down in a notebook, and every day I kind of keep track, and I have a little journal, and it's very sad in that regard. The other side of it is I took a screenshot of my calendar, and here, as you know, your calendar is your life. Like, you book everything, and I've been doing tons of one-on-ones. I think I had 3 of them today with different MBAs and different classmates. And so I took a screenshot of that, and then I took a screenshot of my July calendar, which has pretty much nothing. It is crazy. And so I am a little concerned that, like, when this ends, I'm gonna be super lost for a moment. And so to answer your question about what's next, I've had different kind of hypotheses as the time's gone on. And I sort of initially had planned to not focus on what's next until January. And then when I came back, I was going to take fewer units and really try to devote, a lot of the winter quarter and the spring toward figuring that out. However, what's happened is there's just too much stuff going on. I've been maxing out my units. I've been super busy with school. I've been super busy connecting with people. And I've also been kind of changing some of my thoughts on it. I had a one-on-one with Irv Grossbeck the other day. He gave me some things to reflect on. I met with Graham Weaver. He had some ideas. And I'm just kind of taking it all in. And look, I definitely have the entrepreneur bug. Our company, we did pretty well the last one. I would say, it wasn't what it should have been or could have been. And I have a lot, I definitely have some regrets. I'm proud of some components, and I feel sort of bad about some things. But I'm definitely feeling this notion of, like, let's do it again and do it right. Mm-hmm. So that's building up. Yeah. And I would say there was some burnout coming into this place, and I was hoping to kind of just fall back in love with kind of business, because I've always loved it, right? It's so much fun. This place is like Disneyland for business nerds. And that's been happening. And so I'm kind of like really trying to keep that curiosity happening. I'm creating some hypotheses, talking to some of our classmates, and we'll see. I'll keep you posted. But as of right now, there's no announcements to be made.
I love 2 things that you said today.
Only
about, well, among others. One about, being deliberate about your time here, which we've talked about, previously as well. But I think it's something that I'd like to also take with me into the future. Being deliberate about kind of where I spent my time. I think for me, like here, I remembered how much I loved learning, and over the years before coming here, I kind of stopped doing that. And so making sure that I'm like continuously kind of incorporating that in my life. And to your point about reflection, like you said, like your senior year, we only have the 1 year here. It makes no sense to, not take advantage of the classes that we want to take or the relationships that we want to build or, all of that. Like we have to be, full on in this environment until the very last day.
100%.
And after that, we still have time to reflect,
sure.
and figure out what we want to do next. There's no, this like June 17th graduation date. It's like really an arbitrary deadline,
Yeah, it's just a start, right?
It's just the start.
The start of the next chapter.
Yeah, and we had, God, the thing is, I don't know about for you guys, but like my head is spinning with all these different thoughts. And it's kind of like when you just mentioned about kind of how you spend your time in kind of aligning that with your values. Like Joel Peterson, I'm taking his class now, and Joel Peterson, for those who are listening, was the former chairman of JetBlue Airlines for many years and had been a very successful real estate investor. Really, he does all kinds of things. He's one of the kind of highly regarded folks on campus. He's super nice. But he talks about time, money, and mind share. Like where do you spend your time? Like how much time do you spend, against things that are important to you? How much money do you spend on it? And like how much mind share do you devote to it? Like especially in organizations where you have stated values. Like he talked about safety at JetBlue. What do? They talk about it in the meetings. Like when he talks to employees, make sure that that's front and center. they invest in it, and and he thinks about it, like those kinds of things. And I don't know. There's just so many different sort of frameworks. And Mickey Malka from Ribbit was here, who's a billionaire, FinTech genius, super impressive, had so many incredible stories. And this was sort of an impromptu. One of our classmates had organized kind of a lunchtime, or I guess it was like a Wednesday mid-afternoon kind of session with him. It was very casual. It wasn't even on the GSB campus. It was over at the graduate residences. But he talked about continuous play. Like his framework for work is not so much like winning versus losing. He said like great athletes, and he refers to like Michael Jordan and other basketball players, how they just want to compete. They want to keep playing, and if they lose, if they miss a shot, they want to keep shooting. If they win a game, they want to keep they want to win the next one. If they lose one, they want to get back in the series next time. And how for him, it's not like I want to get to this place and then I'm done. It's like an ongoing kind of continuous, I think he used the term continuous play. And I think that kind of goes for Stanford here as well. Like there's so much information, so many resources, so many connections we're making. And I don't think it all ends on June 17th or whatever it is. To me, it's like, it's kind of fundamentally changed some of the way I think about certain things, the way, I've learned so much. I mean, so one of my other hobbies, I do make music, as you know. I have 100,000 plays on Spotify.
Woo!
Wow.
I don't know if that's a lot or a little. It's all relative. But like, I collaborate with people who are half my age, right? Like I'm trying to figure out some stuff, and I go on, YouTube, and I DM people and they help me. And some of these people are like 20 years old. And so it's very humbling. And it teaches you to be humble about it. And I think here, there's so much to learn. You can learn from folks I just mentioned. I mean, Irv Grossbeck's, I think he's 90-ish.
Yeah.
Joel's, I think, 80-ish. But I learned a lot from these MBAs. I mean, I got to tell you, I'm friends with some undergrads. I took a class at the law school. We became friendly. And, you can learn from anyone here. And I've learned a ton from the MBAs who are sort of starting out their career. And they're so impressive and so smart and so curious. So there's just a lot to process here. And so to me, it's going to be an ongoing experience. So it's not going to end by any measure on, when we graduate.
Yeah.
So hopefully that'll make you feel better. Makes me feel better.
I agree.
No, on that note, I think it's a great way to summarize, the richness of and the diversity of the skills and experience in this environment. And I think, Jed, you've done a really great job at absorbing it. And as you point out, it's just the start. We have one more episode left on this season of the podcast. We've got a special guest coming in next week.
Do we say who it is yet?
No, we're not gonna. We're gonna drop it next week. But Jed,
I know who it is, and I think it's very impressive. So everyone should subscribe. What do they say? Like, subscribe, whatever. Yeah. But
Jed's had the honor of being the last classmate on this season of the podcast. So, Jed, thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to seeing what the future has in store for you. We're going to come down to LA.
For you guys too. I'd love for you to come to LA.
And hang out with all of Jed's celebrity mates over there.
Sure, of course. Whoever you want, Clooney, DiCaprio.
But on that note, thank you everybody for listening, and we'll catch you all next week for one more episode this season.
Absolutely.
Cheers, everyone.
Cheers.